And welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. With the election just 5 days away, we're focusing tonight's show on election coverage. I'll be joined by a panel of experts to analyze local and state races. And I'll talk with Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist Mark Fiore about what it's like to draw up satire this political season. We'll even get a behind-the-scenes look at Mark's creative process. In fact, there he is, getting started on a new drawing. We'll check in a little bit just to see how it shapes up. But first, in the home stretch to the election, polls show the presidential race tightening. Both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have been campaigning in battleground states in a last-ditch effort to expand their electoral reach. We go now to PBS NewsHour political correspondent John Yang for an update. John, nice to have you back with us.
Great to be with you, Thuy.
Well, in this final 5-day sprint toward November 8th, is it mostly about momentum at this point, or is there something that each candidate can still do to make a big difference?
Well, it's a momentum versus machine. Donald Trump feels he's got the momentum. He's going out. He's looking for a Democratic state that he can flip. The way it is now that Hillary Clinton could probably lose Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Florida and still win the presidency. She's out there trying to build bolster the Democratic fortresses they feel they've built in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan to keep Donald Trump from hitting 270 electoral votes.
This is perhaps the most divisive, ugly election that people have seen, most people have seen in their recent memories, John. And what will each candidate need to do to reunite the country if he or she wins?
Thuy, that is a great point. I think no matter who wins, you're going to have a substantial portion of voters who aren't going to accept the outcome, that the opponent won, that their candidate lost. You have Donald Trump talking about how the system's rigged, anticipation that he's telling people to go to the polls to look for cheaters, people trying to vote more than once. None of this is going to go away. None of this anger, none of this frustration, none of this animosity between the two sides is going to go away on November 9th. This is a big challenge for whoever wins. I really don't know how this is going to happen, how this is going to work. This is a big challenge.
And speaking of the animosity, John, in fact, some Trump supporters are already, vowing unrest if Hillary Clinton wins. Some senior Republican lawmakers are already talking about impeaching Clinton if she wins. Where will all that lead?
You've got Republicans already talking in the House, where they're unlikely to change control, talking about that they already have 2 years worth of investigations into Clinton's tenure at the State Department. They promise hearings right off the bat in January. This is going to be, there's animosity. You've got Republicans talking about, including John McCain, talking about not taking up any Supreme Court nomination that Hillary Clinton makes in the next 4 years if she's elected. This is unprecedented sort of talk before a president comes in. It really does not bode well for whoever wins over the next 4 years.
And John, just real quickly, what are some of the key things that we should be looking for in the next few days into Election Day?
You're going to be looking at the candidates making their final push, making their final closing statements, and where they do it. Donald Trump looking for a Democratic state to turn Republican. At the same time, you're looking at Hillary Clinton sort of shoring up the Democratic states. Their big goal this weekend is to turn out the African-American vote for her on Tuesday.
All right, going to be a busy weekend for them and for you, John. You're out on the campaign trail as well. John Yang with PBS NewsHour, thank you so much. All right, let's check back in on cartoonist Mark Fiore now and see how he's doing on that drawing. Looks like he's working on something involving the California bear. Not quite sure what is going to be the main gist of it. All right, well, we'll come back to Mark later in the program and talk about the illustration he's working on for us and see the big reveal. Turning now to state and local races, this Tuesday will be the culmination of a long and expensive election season with nearly $500 million raised for and against 17 different statewide ballot measures. Joining me to talk about the big donations and efforts to mobilize key voting groups are James Taylor, Director of the African American Studies Program at University of San Francisco, UC Berkeley political science professor Lisa Garcia Bedolla, and KQED senior editor of politics and government, Scott Shafer. Thank you all for being here. Scott, let's begin with you. Let's start off by talking about money. 17 propositions. That's a pretty heavy ballot. Heavy campaign spending as well. Which measures are seeing the biggest spending?
Well, not surprisingly, Thuy, it's the ones where big industries are threatening their profits. Their profits are being threatened. So drug companies are threatened by Prop 61, which would limit drug prices, and pharma, big pharma, has contributed about $110 million to defeat that. You can't turn on a TV set without seeing a veteran telling you to vote no on Prop 61. And then number 2 would be Prop 56, the $2 a pack tax on cigarettes. That has raised about $71 million from the tobacco industry. So, and both of those are vastly outspending the other side, the ones that are trying to get those measures passed. So it's those account for a big chunk of the money. But there are the death penalty and marijuana. Surprisingly, what hasn't attracted a lot of money is gun control. Prop 63, you would expect the NRA to come in with a lot of money, and they've spent about $95,000, in part because a lot of what's in Prop 63 is already in the law. Right. Jerry Brown signed a lot of it this year. And also they looked at the polling. It was pretty clear that it was going to pass. And I think they just decided to play in other states where there are also gun control measures on the ballot.
The soda tax measure is also seeing some money being thrown to the local measures. But Lisa, how much of an impact does spending have? Because, for example, could it backfire? 2 years ago, Berkeley passed its soda tax measure, even though the Beverage Association threw a lot of money at it.
Well, and especially because it signals to people who I should support, right? So what's interesting is both the measures that we talked about, the big pharma one and the tobacco one, are winning. And so it suggests that people see that spending and they think, oh, this must actually be a good thing because there's distrust of those industries. So in a strange way, having an industry say that has little trust say, we don't want that law, actually makes people think that maybe they should pass it.
And James, speaking of big spending, there are several ballot measures that take on the issues of money and spending. We have raising taxes on tobacco, which Scott just mentioned, the soda tax, prescription drugs, taking issue with how things are priced. What does this say about the political climate in California right now?
I mean, it says that we have a progressive, I think, electorate. I think that is one of the things we've been able to detect for sure in terms of the liberalization around the question of the death penalty. Right now, the death penalty, the opposition to the death penalty and commuting sentences to life without the possibility of parole is winning by about 3 percentage points. And so this is just one area, I think, where you see this development. So.
Well, we're also seeing more, also still staying on the topic of money here, we're also seeing more Silicon Valley involvement in politics. Peter Thiel has donated more than $1 million in support of Donald Trump, not directly to him, but to groups supporting him. Facebook co-founder Dustin Moskovitz has pledged $20 million to groups that support Hillary Clinton. Could this election be a turning point for Silicon Valley involvement in politics?
Well, Peter Thiel practically underwrote Ron Paul's libertarian campaign in 2012. He is basically a libertarian, an openly gay libertarian. He is supporting Trump. He's given him over $1 million. But, I think what you're seeing in this campaign is more mobilization because of Donald Trump, in part. I think that he is so anathema to so many companies and their workers and the people who use social media that it's really encouraged them to come forward. Trump's position on immigration and trade and diversity in general, I think, has really something that Silicon Valley shudders when they think about that. But I would also say that, even in the primaries, Larry Ellison from Oracle gave $5 million to Marco Rubio. That was not a great investment. But, so I think they have been engaged. And then, they've also been very engaged in some of the issues that are on the ballot, the propositions.
And I think you could see it as a maturation of Silicon Valley, right? That the companies are getting older, they're getting more set, they have policy needs that they want addressed. And so they're seeing the political system as much more the place where they need to make those investments now. And you also see increases in lobbying spending and other kinds of spending. So it's just, I think, they're getting more fixed and they know what they want, and they want the people who can get what they want in office.
And Silicon Valley's been pretty bipartisan in a lot of ways. I mean, you see even Kevin McCarthy, Rand Paul, when he was running, went down there. Paul Ryan goes down there and raises money. And so they've tried to maintain, I mean, it's very possible that the Republicans will still be in control of Congress. It's just that at the very top of the ticket, I think you've seen a lot of reaction to Trump.
I mean, but the Silicon Valley, again, seems to reflect the progressivism of the state to the extent that from what I've detected or read, over 90% of these contributions that are coming in are coming for the Democratic and the sort of liberal causes and liberal, angle of the state's politics. And so it seems to me that Silicon Valley is certainly, as Lisa said, realizing that politics is important in terms of getting in the game. But at the same time, it doesn't sort of play out, in the end.
Since we're talking about Silicon Valley, let's go ahead and talk about the congressional race between 8-term incumbent Mike Honda and his challenger Ro Khanna. About $6 million spent by both campaigns combined. A lot of money there. Why is that race seeing so much attention?
It's their second time around. I mean, they've fought before, and this is their second time, and they're going to, it was close last time, and it's close this time, and we'll see what happens.
I think Ro Khanna is someone who has been sort of seen as a rising star in Democratic politics also, and he's very close to the tech industry, and I think the tech industry has made the case with their money and other ways that Mike Honda, they feel, is not the best representative for them from Silicon Valley. You're right, they have raced and spent $6 million, but there's a race down the coast where Lois Capps is retiring that actually has attracted about $6 million in outside spending, which is much more than the race, the Honda-Khanna race, and in part because it's two Democrats. And in a lot of ways, groups that care about, Democratic issues don't really care who wins because it's going to be a Democrat, whereas down the coast, Lois Capps barely won last time. If she loses, that seat's going to go Republican. And so you're seeing the Democrats funneling millions and millions of dollars in addition to the money that the candidates are raising.
It is an interesting political landscape right now. We have, especially with the top two system here. Talk about how that's changing. I mean, on the one hand, with the demographic changes, we're getting more diverse races. We have, Mike Honda, an Asian American versus Ro Khanna, another Asian American. We have two Democratic women running for the Senate.
Women of color.
Women of color,
That's
yes. In San Francisco, running for the state Senate, we have a gay man versus an Asian woman, Wiener versus Kim.
That's right.
Are voters having a hard time distinguishing between those candidates, though? Is it a matter of trying to decide which one is more liberal?
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it makes things much harder for people, right? Most people used party cues to signal a set of policy interests, right? And they know who they want to support based upon the party. And if you don't have that cue, it means you actually have to do a lot of research. And most Americans are not that interested in politics to do that research. I think it really raises the bar for voters, which is something there's going to be more of. And then the second part, which I thought, at least in the polling on the Senate race, which was interesting, is that about 20 to 30% of Republicans say they're just not going to vote in that race because they have no one to vote for. And so that's troubling. And I think this new system, it's unclear how it's going to play out in the long term.
The other thing I think that happens is when you have two candidates from the same party who don't really differ that much, it becomes very personal and very bitter. And you're seeing that in the Honda-Khanna race and the Kim Wiener as well. They're really going after each other on very personal
I hosted their debate last week on campus, and the thing that came out of that, besides a very substantive debate, was it just got really personal. And Phil Matier, one of our local journalists, said that when people are so closely aligned ideologically, they have to go personal. It becomes a personal attack.
And that's a concern for Democrats going forward because we're seeing more and more of these Dem-on-Dem races, and you're seeing a little bit of a fracture within the party because you've got the moderate pro-business Democrats and then the more liberal coastal Democrats or the environmental Democrats, and I think there's some concern in the Democratic Party that increasingly you're going to see that kind of Democrat on Democrat fighting with each other, and they're a little concerned about where that is.
I think that played out nationally with Hillary and Bernie, right?
Exactly.
And I think you'll see that with Jane Kim, obviously Bernie and the Democrats have endorsed Wiener, but I think we're going to see that more and more, especially in places like California where you have this top two system, where you're going to have, I think it was in Georgia, a colleague of mine in Atlanta, said the same thing is happening in Georgia, where you have R's going up against R's in many of the districts.
Let's get back to some of the key measures. I want to talk some more about that as well. A lot of them are getting attention, things involving criminal justice reform, the death penalty, marijuana. Do these indicate a public shift in public attitudes about these issues? Because we've seen these things come up before.
Absolutely, because most of them, marijuana is winning pretty handily, at least at this point, according to the polling, significantly different from the last time it was on the ballot. And
6 years ago, people rejected a similar measure.
Absolutely, and there's definitely a generational shift. People under 40 much more likely to support it than people over 40, not surprisingly. People who use marijuana or report using marijuana also more likely to support it.
The parental
but I think
backlash.
it does speak to a different, we've had, people often talk about demographic shifts And we don't often talk about the policies that map onto that. And it really is a different, especially in criminal justice, a fundamentally different way of seeing what the role of the state is and how we should be punishing people and the kinds of policies we should have in the long term.
And I'm sorry. Yeah. I was going to say, I would just add to what you said that there are also regional differences. I mean, Inland Empire and Central Valley, they were both very much opposed to legalizing pot a few years ago. Now, in the latest field poll, it's just about split right down the middle. So you're seeing it that way as well.
So are these, James, are these issues, criminal justice reform, for example, marijuana, death penalty, are these issues mobilizing Black and Latino voters?
I can't speak for Latino voters. I'll defer to Lisa's expertise on that. But in terms of Black voters, I don't think so. I don't think these particular issues are driving them at all. And in fact, Hillary Clinton's top of the ticket campaign is not driving Black enthusiasm at all. And so I think one of the things we should be careful of, though, is what happened in 2012 throughout the country was people underestimated the Black turnout and Black performance, and it actually outperformed, its expectation twice in a row. And I think some of it had to do with these voter ID laws around the country, where Black people saw that in one lifetime their grandparents or parents didn't have the right to vote in the 60s, and then here we go, before that generation passes, the baby boomer generation, they might lose the vote again. And I think people came out unexpectedly in support of the ways in which Black voters performed. And so I would suggest that there may be a situation in which Blacks will outperform their expectations where they're not being detected. I think Latinos and Blacks are, notoriously undersampled in a lot of the polling that goes on.
I would just say it is not pot legalization that's going to mobilize Latinos, it's Prop 55, right? And so Prop 55, the idea of funding for education in schools, the Prop 55 campaign and their coalition partner, California Calls, they're going to call pretty much every low propensity voter of color in the state of California this year.
What about the bilingual education measure?
And the bilingual education, absolutely, absolutely. So those are the things to look at. They're the things that really matter, especially education is almost always one of the top issues Latinos care about. Most of the children in our public schools are Latino, and so these are the kinds of things that really hit home for people.
And I would just say overshadowing all of that is probably Trump. For Latinos. Yes. I mean, I think
but see, I would add
not to say that what you're describing isn't important, but I do think Trump has really gotten people. If you look at the registration numbers in California, they really went way up among Latinos after the Republican convention, the Democratic convention, and some of the debates as well. So we'll see if those first-time voters vote, but they did register.
No, I'd be interested in looking at the patterns, because nationally you might have one story, women or Latinos or minorities in general responding to Trump. And then locally, it may be a very different pattern where you may have, for example, the physically disabled, who people aren't, I don't know in terms of measuring how people sample, or whether the physically disabled are actually studied, as a national study of any sort. But when Donald Trump spoke out and offended this group, it crosses every racial category that exists. And I think there'll be one big story, a national story, as to what the media tells us is the outcome. And then there'll be all of these subtexts throughout the country, 50 different subtexts, where Asians may have an influence in some places, the physically disabled others, Latinos in other places, the millennials in other places, and Blacks in other places. But the media will tell us initially, this is what happened. And then they will base that on exit polling. And then a month or two later, the political scientists will come in with the census data and just show how off it all was.
What actually happened.
What about the statewide story? That's the national story. What about the statewide story, though? Are we seeing a shift to moving more toward the left? I mean, over the beginning of the 1990s and for the roughly 2 decades thereafter, we saw a number of conservative measures passed, right? We had the 3 strikes law. We had Prop 187, which essentially denied public benefits to illegal immigrants. We had Prop 227, the bilingual education ban, 209.
But see, what bothers me about that is that might be the stuff that can help Donald Trump, because of the way in which there might be a backlash. I'm saying, here in California in the 90s, we saw LA blow up in 91, 92 with Rodney King. Then we saw the Rodney King of the O.J. Simpson reaction. White voters responded in this very specific way you just mentioned.
Crime
with
is
these
also low. It's at a historically low rate, and whereas in the 90s there were crime waves and serial killings and high-profile killings. And then just quickly, I would say too that we're moving to the left, but other states are ahead of us on marriage, on legalizing pot, gun control, so we're not exactly at the front line.
But I would just say, I would go further back, and if you go to the 70s, we had tax revolts, we had all of these conservative policies, and the change in our electorate has actually changed the policy environment in California, and that's important to know.
Okay. a lively discussion, much to talk about. We tried to get through as much as we could. Thank you to all three, Scott Shafer with KQED, James Taylor with the University of San Francisco, and Lisa Garcia Bedolla of UC Berkeley. Great to have all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, earlier in the show, we saw Mark Fiore working on his latest cartoon. The Pulitzer Prize winner is the artist behind the KQED series, Drawn to the Bay. Now let's take a look at Fiore's finished drawing. And Mark is already in our studio. Hi, Mark.
Hey,
finishing up his sketch. All right, let's do the big reveal. What do you have for us?
Here it is. The one I'm working on is it's a Prop 64 cartoon, just because it's sounding like it's going to pass. So thought we should be ready.
That's the marijuana measure, legalizing recreational marijuana. That's a pretty calm, relaxed, happy-looking bear there with this joint.
It's a very happy bear, a hungry bear.
You know, you have so much great work, and I often wonder about your artistic process. How does it take you? How long does it take you to go from concept to a finished sketch?
It depends on the issue and the cartoon itself, but generally, you know, we want to leave between 3 hours to 5 hours, start to finish, from the sketchbook, coming up with the thought and the idea behind the cartoon, to actually finishing it.
So you did this pretty fast for us. Thank you
This
for
was a
speeding
quick
up the
one,
process.
sure.
In the world of TV, we
Anytime.
move fast, you know.
Stone bears, I'm fast with them.
Well, I interviewed the Sacramento Bee's editorial cartoonist Jack Ullman earlier this year when he won the Pulitzer Prize, and he said he often gets his ideas from just walking around the Sacramento Bee newsroom and talking to colleagues. You don't work in a traditional newsroom every day.
True.
Where do you get your ideas from?
You know, it's good to hear about Jack, too, and congratulations again to Jack Ullman. He's a good friend of mine. But I generally, if I'm not here at KQED, the usual way that I'm coming up with my cartoons and the ideas, it's anywhere from reading what's out there online, or listening to the news, or really a lot of it is just being out there, talking to friends, talking to people that are just in your neighborhood.
And boy,
walking around the city, people are going to give you stories.
Sure, and boy, has this election season given you a lot of material, I'm sure. 17 propositions statewide on this year's ballot. You've done illustrations referencing some of them, including Prop 60, which would require performers in adult films to wear condoms. Was it challenging to find a way to illustrate the ballot measure?
Well, it was either doing the route that I went with that cartoon, or doing lots of pixelation and black bars. So I oftentimes, because there's other issues besides condoms and porn where you don't necessarily want to show what's actually going on. And sometimes you can have a stronger idea behind that cartoon if you leave it up to the reader.
And this is what you did in this case.
Yes, that's the idea.
You also found a clever way to talk about how times are changing in California, especially in our attitudes about marijuana. We saw what you just did, but you also had another cartoon about Prop 64. Tell me about the one we're looking at here, then and now, reflecting a change in the times.
It feels like we're really there right now. I mean, we're hearing about all the great wonders of tax revenue coming from legalizing pot. First it was medical marijuana, and now it's recreational marijuana if it passes. And you're going from this being a terrible, terrible thing to, oh wow, we could really close some budget loopholes here and close some gaps, and actually make a lot of money with this too. And so instead of people being, these stoners down the street, they're actually contributing to California society.
Well, speaking of change in attitudes, right? Plastic bags, we've used those for decades. Now we've got some competing measures on plastic bags on the ballot as well. Do you think this election, more than others, is causing confusion for voters? We also have competing measures on the death penalty, for example.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think actually that plastic bag one is one of the best examples where, if you look at the propositions, they were both sponsored by the plastic bag industry. And they both sound like they're very do-gooder propositions, but one is basically to, do away with plastic bags entirely, and the other one is to essentially have the money go to good environmental stuff. But if you dig a little deeper, you realize, well, wait, why are these guys putting that on the ballot?
Yeah. What do you see as the role of political cartooning in democracies?
I think overall, the role of political cartooning in democracies is to really make people stop and think and to question. I mean, oftentimes the Drawn to the Bay cartoons that I'm doing are not necessarily political. I don't always consider them political cartoons, but I think when they are political or political cartoons in general, are really designed to hold people's feet to the fire, whether it's the leaders or corrupt politicians or corrupt corporations, or even just to put a question out there and get people paying attention to a certain issue that they aren't.
And you're a Bay Area resident.
Yes.
Some of your cartoons poke fun at the culture here in the Bay Area and some of the problems we have, especially traffic, which is getting worse and worse.
Yes, and it's all tied in, too, to so much other that's actually happening in the Bay Area right now, whether it's the tech boom. I mean, a lot of that is because of the tech boom. But that's one of the things that I love about doing Drawn to the Bay cartoons, is that it's this area that I've fallen in love with for, probably when I moved here when I was 12. And it's just so amazing here, and it's such a place where there's so much diversity, and sadly some of that diversity is in a really, really wide income spread. Sure. So that's one thing, talking about walking around and getting cartoon ideas.
What are the responses you get when you're poking fun at life in the Bay Area?
Some of the responses, it's very varied. I mean, generally it's people sharing their stories. Like, for example, the traffic cartoon you were talking about. It's the responses in the comments on Facebook or wherever the cartoon appears, people saying, oh no, my commute's much worse. This is my story. And that's a lot of what I'm trying to do, is really bring people to these cartoons so they can actually talk about them and share their stories too.
Sure.
Exactly.
So, your drawings always make me chuckle. Are you a funny guy when you're not working?
It depends. It depends on when you find me. When I'm doing a hard-hitting, skewering a politician cartoon, like I've done for a lot of years, the cartoons might not be funny and so nice. It was actually one of the funnier things that my wife told me when she first met me, was that your cartoons are so much more mean than you are. So I'm doing something different with Drawn to the Bay, where it's a little bit more like a family conversation. You don't want to go out daggers drawn. You want to actually have a conversation.
Yes, provoke thought. Mark Fiore, Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist and a nice guy. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Thuy. Thanks for having me.
And be sure to check out our online voter guide illustrated by Mark Fiore. On election night, we'll have live results for all of the Bay Area's 9 counties at elections.kqed.org. I'm Thuy Vu. Thanks so much for watching.